Audit initiated. The notebook vanishes, a message. Correct the story, lands, and Letitia, the 16-year-old they tried to humiliate, rips the headers live, traces LSR vault to Valtierra, locks the proofs with checksums, and leaves the famed polyglot Roberto speechless as a tip. Samuel's promise, whispers. Check under the cover board. A hidden ledger surfaces, a ringed hand trembles, and a mirror is waiting. Do we expose him now or catch him in the act? Before we begin this next leg, a word to the heart watching right now. Subscribe. Not for me, for the libraries and living rooms where history is kept alive. What happens next is a blueprint for what you do when power tries to edit the past. Not the stone, no one would be that simple. The thief lifted what was soft enough to hide and priceless enough to break a lineage if it vanished. Night vision green in the photo. A gloved hand. The message. Correct the story. The kind of sentence that pretends to be advice when it's a threat. Security rewound footage to the minute when the cameras glitched. Nothing. Pixels behaved like soldiers obeying the wrong general. The feed resumed with the case intact and the room slightly rearranged the way a dream rearranges your kitchen. Letitia stood still, hands on the glass, living inside a silence so complete it pressed her heartbeat back into her ribs. Donna Carmen reached for her daughter's shoulder and met a composure there that did not belong to 16. The famous polyglot, Roberto, hovered at the threshold of the room like a man asking a church for permission to enter. He didn't speak first. The ethics chair did, with the voice of someone who knows which sentences can't be walked back. Chain of custody. Temporary closure. Notify insurance. Call the police. He said integrity the way people say oxygen. Letitia finally breathed. We don't wait for permission to protect what the notebook was for. No drama in it. Just a decision. They moved. The team split like light through a prism. One group to security logs. One to the email headers. One to the vendor who supplied the climate case with its elegant lock that now looked like a wink. Roberto volunteered for coffee, chairs, copies, and phone calls. The small work he could trust himself with. Pride sat in the hallway and waited for news it had no right to receive first. A graduate student from computer science arrived with a backpack full of cables and the energy of someone who studied all night because curiosity is better than caffeine. She pulled the email apart. Metadata spilled out like a map written in invisible ink. The message had bounced through 3 servers, all boring, and one small relay belonging to an NGO whose mailing list had been used for language preservation petitions last year. Letitia blinked. She knew that list. She had created it. Whoever sent the threat had used a good disguise and a worse assumption, that she would be too afraid to call a number she herself had set up. She dialed. The admin answered, a volunteer in his 60s who ran the NGO from a one-room office crowded with flyers, a potted plant, and the sound of buses passing the window. We didn't send anything, he said, voice already wounded. But we can see which account was used. He read a string of characters that looked like nothing until they didn't. LSR VRLT. Letitia saw it first. Everyone else saw her seeing it. Not L. Silva, she said. LSR Vault. Vault. As in Valtierra. The room turned its head slowly toward a list on the wall. The exhibit sponsors printed neatly beneath the thank you text. The Valtierra Foundation, the private arm tied to the old mentor whose letters had slept in a box for 3 decades and woken a different world. The same foundation whose law firm had faxed a threat that morning with the clean font of confidence money buys. Thumbnail-worthy moment number 1, a close shot on the sponsor board, the Valtierra logo, the red circle drawn by a trembling marker, the camera pulling back to reveal a room full of people who realize the villain isn't a mystery. It's a structure. The dean exhaled as if he'd been holding it since the 1980s. We proceed, he said. With receipts. Roberto raised a careful hand. Let me take the first hit, he offered. Publicly. Not as a hero. As a lesson. If they want a spectacle, let's give them a syllabus. Letitia shook her head. No centering. We publish the timeline. We show the chain of custody. We stream the audit. She turned to the camera crew that had been documenting under community control. If elders agree, we let the world watch clean work. Consent traveled the room. Elders nodded. A grandmother in blue, one of the keepers of stories, lifted her chin. We've been audited by worse, she said. This time we will be present. The live stream went up before noon with a title that did not pander. How to Tell the Truth Under Threat. Chats filled with questions, then prayer hand emojis, then translations of "We're with you" in 10 languages. The team labeled every document as if labeling were a spell. Scans. Timestamps. Witness statements. Hashes for files that proved when scans had been created. The cryptographic fingerprints exact and cold and unarguable. A notary's seal from 2 years earlier. An email from Oxford acknowledging receipt of anonymized samples 3 summers ago. A video of Samuel Santos in his kitchen, recorded by a nephew, teaching Letitia the shelter marker with a laugh soft enough to be medicine. The audit entered with a briefcase and an expression that suggested skepticism had earned him a pension. He expected defensiveness and found choreography. He expected missing pieces and found a table set with labeled plates. He expected a child and found a colleague. He asked for the original scans. Letitia slid a drive across the table like a chess move she'd planned 5 turns ago. Checksums match, the student from computer science said. The audit nodded, the kind that says, "You have done your homework and also mine." While the world watched the boring heroism of documentation, the threat sender sent a second message to Letitia's private inbox. Correct the story or the notebook leaves the country. This one attached a photo taken against a car seat, the kind of leather foundations buy for their fleet. The hand in the frame wore a school ring, the kind of circle that pretends to be earned when it's inherited. Roberto's jaw tightened. He recognized the crest. He had shaken those rings for years. "Don't guess out here," Letitia murmured. "Guessing is how we got insulted on stage the first time." Then, "We need proof on paper and proof in pattern." Pattern. The word landed and opened a door. Her great-grandfather had taught her to watch for what language wears when it goes somewhere it's not supposed to go. The thief had lifted the notebook, but the notebook had left fingerprints on the thief that looked like grammar. In the first threat email, the injunction "correct the story" used "correct" like a verb, not an adjective. In the second, the same phrase arrived with a comma missing where certain schools always leave it because they think rhythm is beneath them. The Portuguese in both messages carried a tiny borrowed cadence from Spanish that old money São Paulo rarely reveals unless the writer studied across a border or vacationed long enough to start dreaming in another city's vowels. Letitia built a profile the way cartographers build coastlines. She layered rhythm over register, syntax over spite, and found a shape. The sender was not a lawyer. He was close to lawyers. He was someone who had sat in rooms where letters are drafted and edited and redrafted while coffee pretends to be lunch. He had access to the museum at odd hours and the IT vendor at responsible ones. He had the ring. He had the car. He had the kind of job whose title ends in director without requiring direction. Thumbnail-worthy moment number 2, a split screen, the threat email on the left, Letitia's great-grandfather's notebook scan on the right. Arrows pointing not to symbols but to habits of mind. Caption: Language catches liars. The dean made a call. The university's general counsel arranged a quiet conversation with the Valtierra Foundation COO, a woman whose emails never forgot commas. She listened, denied everything, requested cooperation, and slipped once. "Our director of strategic partnerships has been out all morning." A sentence that meant nothing except the jog in her voice that meant everything. Her phone line had the faint echo of a car. The audit's assistant traced the caller ID to a tower near the private airport where foundations keep hangars the way people keep spare rooms. Someone knocked hard on the livestream chat with a username that wasn't a username at all. Samuel's promise. No avatar. Just text. Check the copy under the cover board. Letitia's stomach dropped. The notebook wasn't just paper and ink. It was a living thing that had inherited its author's caution. Samuel had taught her the shelter marker. Of course he'd sheltered his own work. She ran to the exhibit room with 2 conservators and a camera rolling carefully. They opened the empty case the way you open a letter from a person you miss. The board lining the bottom lifted. Beneath it, a narrow recess. Inside, a second object wrapped in archival tissue and a smell like dust and eucalyptus. A ghost notebook. Thinner. Older. Not a duplicate, a ledger of keys. Cross-references. Cipher maps. Diagrams of how to tell a forgery from the real thing. A note in Samuel's hand. If you're reading this, it means the day came. Do not let fear teach the lesson. Letitia's scream was small and holy. The camera caught her eyes and the way relief can break a person just long enough to rebuild them stronger. She slid to the floor and laughed a laugh that sounded like a prayer finally allowed to finish its sentence. The audit skepticism turned into paperwork faster than it had ever turned anywhere. Chain of custody for the hidden ledger. Photos. Signatures. A visible timestamp overlay that could be checked against the server clock, the wall clock, and the unforgiving clock in the corner of the livestream. Roberto leaned against the doorway and put both palms over his face. When he dropped them, he looked younger by 10 years and older by 10 truths. He hid a key to the key, he whispered. Because he knew the world, the grandmother in blue replied. And he knew the world would try to know him without paying for the lesson. They compared the hidden ledger to high-resolution scans of the stolen notebook. The ledger recorded not just symbols but pressure. Notes about the way Samuel pressed his pen when he wrote certain forms. A forger copying shapes would miss the dance of force. The student from computer science built a tiny program that sampled stroke width from the scans and plotted it. The real notebook's pattern looked like a heartbeat. The forged page, because of course the thief had tried to plant one in earlier photos to claim authorship, looked like static. Thumbnail-worthy moment number 3, a simple plot on screen, no fancy colors, heartbeat versus static. Caption. Authenticity has a pulse. The police arrived with caution and cameras. The Foundation's law firm arrived with confidence and copies. The COO arrived with a voice that had learned to sound like cooperation. The Director of Strategic Partnerships arrived late, without the ring he always wore, because people remove jewelry when they don't want to be seen through it. He smiled toward cameras and winced toward the case. He saw the recess. He measured his options and found them suddenly small. He reached for a sentence. It hit the floor. Letitia didn't raise her voice. You asked me to correct the story, she said, speaking to the man and also to every old decision standing behind him like a wall of portraits. Here is the correction. The story belongs to the people who carried it when it wasn't valuable to you. The audit finished the first pass. The report would take weeks, but the interim conclusion was clean enough to read aloud. No breach by the research team. Evidence of targeted interference. Immediate restoration of exhibit recommended. The university's communications office drafted a statement that didn't sound like a translation of fear. They named what happened. They named who taught them. They named an apology without asking to be excused from its cost. Roberto asked for the microphone and then handed it to an elder instead. The room watched a man choose usefulness over visibility in real time. By evening, the live stream had become a classroom. People learned words they didn't know how to want yesterday. Checksum, provenance, diacritic, code switching. Teenagers posted screenshots of notebooks their grandparents kept in drawers, suddenly seeing archives where they'd seen clutter. A teacher in a mining town wrote, "We're starting a club." Letitia finally slept for 90 minutes in a chair beside her mother, head tilted toward a future she did not fear. Morning brought two developments, both sharp. First, an email from the Valtierra Foundation's board announcing the suspension of the Director of Strategic Partnerships pending an internal investigation and the withdrawal of funding from any project that compromises neutrality. It read like a polite door slam. Second, a private message from Samuel's promise again. The notebook is still in the building. He panicked. He hid it in a place that feels like a confession. Start where mirrors are generous. Letitia woke as if the message had shaken her shoulder. Mirrors. Generous. Confession. Roberto's office. Not the current one, the old one with the posters and the bookshelf camera light, the room where he had narrated 1,000 confident segments. He hadn't used it in months. The university had reassigned it to no one. A shrine to a charisma that had become contrition. The room's mirror, the one he had used to straighten his red bow tie before a headline, hung opposite the door. They walked there together. Letitia, Donna Carmen, the audit, a guard, a camera, a grandmother, a dean, and a man carrying the memory of who he had been. Roberto unlocked the door with a key that felt heavier than it was. The office smelled like dust and apology. The mirror reflected a crowd that had not stood together before this year. Letitia scanned the room, not with eyes only but with pattern. She remembered a sentence from part 1 that had become a compass. Where the disappearing path meets the place to hide, the free leave names for the children who will come. The disappearing path was a hallway people had stopped walking. The place to hide was a room that had sheltered performance. The names were written in a notebook so many tried to erase. She knelt by the baseboard beneath the mirror, fingers gentle. Old painters leave old paint where screws used to be. The board lifted with a sound like a sigh. Inside, a narrow cavity. Tissue. Leather. Ink. The notebook. No drama when her hands touched it. Just reverence. She placed it on the table like a small body returned to a family. The audit's gloves moved. The camera didn't zoom. Nothing needed help being important. They opened it. Inside, a new sheet had been glued, a confession in neat handwriting. The directors. He had tried to plant an authorship claim and then panicked when the internet learned the difference between a myth and a method. He wrote that he had wanted to protect a legacy that had protected him. He wrote that the old mentor had told him once, "History is an instrument, learn to play it." He wrote that he had finally recognized which songs hurt people. He left the ring in the cavity. He wrote, "Do with this what you must." Letitia read, not for vengeance but for the map of next steps. Criminal charges would be boring and necessary. Restitution would be creative and public. The foundation would want a statement whose purpose would be to escape a mirror. The team would insist on one that invited people to look into it. They returned the notebook to the case. The ledger went back under the board, but not alone. Letitia slid in a new page, a protocol written in plain language naming exactly what to do if a future hand tried to take what wasn't theirs. She titled it for whoever is next. The exhibit reopened. The line reached the courtyard. Children practiced the shelter marker in the air and went home and drew it on paper their parents put on the refrigerator door like protection. Roberto stood outside, no longer apologizing with his whole body, just moving in a way that made room. He lifted a crate, held a door, listened. He didn't narrate the miracle. He helped stack chairs afterward. Night came soft. The team gathered at folding tables with food that tasted like relief. Laughter returned, the kind that doesn't perform. Someone played a voice note from a teenager in a mining town. I stayed in school. I started the club. We named it after Samuel. The phone buzzed again, not with a threat but with a calendar invite. Peer review round 2 meeting. acceptance pending minor revision. The room cheered and the sound felt earned. By the time cups were empty, one last envelope slid under the center's door. No return address. Inside, a photocopy of a page from the old mentor's private diary, dated months after the seminar series in the 1980s. The handwriting admitted what the box of letters had hinted. He had suppressed the work because it threatened his theory. In the margin, a line, "If this ever surfaces, redirect to Valtierra. They know how to handle storms." The room didn't curse. It didn't even gasp. It did what it had learned to do. It filed, scanned, time-stamped, breathed, and looked at one another like people who refused to be surprised by what they refused to let win. The message arrived like a pebble knocking on a window. We found another stone. 2 valleys over. Same red earth, same patient trees, a symbol no one recognized. Half question mark, half flame. Before we continue, a word to the heart watching right now. Subscribe to this channel to support our growth. Tell us where are you watching from in the section comment below. What you choose to amplify decides what survives. They drove at dawn. The road lifted and dropped like a held breath. In the van, Letitia, Donna Carmen, 2 elders from the first community, the audit's quiet presence, a conservator, a law student with a stack of consent forms, and Roberto in the back seat, learning to take up less space than his gratitude. The village waited with chairs set in shade and a table holding coffee that tasted like welcome. The stone rested on blankets, its surface chalky with age, its lines cut shallow but sure. Children kept their distance and also didn't. The symbol at the top looked like curiosity catching fire. Letitia didn't rush. She asked for permission to approach, then to photograph, then to speak. Head nods came like blessings. She traced the first line in the air, not touching. The question flame sign appeared 3 times, at the start, the middle, the end, like hinges. Samuel's ledger had no entry for it. That felt right. Some keys are handed to descendants only when they arrive. She mapped what she knew. Shelter markers. Conditional paths. Temporal signatures for messages meant for those who come later. This inscription carried all of them and something else. A rhythm that wasn't just language. It was instruction set to cadence. The way recipes are taught with a song so hands remember when paper is scarce. She asked an elder to hum the chant she'd mentioned at the meeting. The woman smiled and started softly. The children joined without being asked. The chant rose and carried the symbol in its climb. The question lifting, the flame warming. Letitia heard it. The mark meant ask with heat, not with harm. Inquiry as firelight, not wildfire. Questions that warm a circle, not burn a house. She translated not word for word but rule for rule. When those who come after arrive at a door like this, they must ask with light and leave with less darkness. The middle hinge locked it in. What you carry away, replace with something the children can use. The final hinge turned the key. Speak the names of the hidden teachers before you speak your own. Letitia steps back, palms open, the elder's voice carrying the room, and the symbol drawn in the air with a fingertip like a spark that won't scorch. They worked all morning. The inscription mapped to 3 places: a grove used for stories, a path that disappears into scrub when the sun sits high, and the wall of a one-room schoolhouse where a faded mural showed a river that never made the maps. The coordinates were linguistic again, not lat/long but habits of speech. How a suffix softened in the mouths of the grandmothers, how a tone bent around a vowel when a blessing was spoken. The stone wasn't a treasure map. It was an ethics map. They documented as if documentation were prayer. Photos with rulers. Audio with claps to sync. Names spelled the way the bearers spell them. Consent recorded on camera with jokes to ease shyness. It looked like bureaucracy and felt like respect. News traveled ahead of them like birds. Back on campus, the board of the Valtierra Foundation released a statement that read like a door closing and opening at once. The director who hid the notebook had been terminated. The foundation would fund the community center for 5 years under community control. The award named for the old mentor would be retired and replaced with one named for Samuel Santos. It wasn't absolution. It was a start that cost something. Roberto walked the village with a broom and a notebook he didn't open. He carried toddlers so their mothers could drink coffee with 2 free hands. He caught himself narrating in his head and turned the volume down. When a teenager asked if he spoke 30 languages, he said, "I'm learning to speak one better, listening." By late afternoon, the team sat under a jacaranda and did what good teams do. Compared notes until patterns appeared where egos used to. The question flame symbol linked more than lines. It linked eras. Some pieces of the code were meant to stay inside the community. Names, recipes, routes. Some were meant to go out and build bridges, methods, maps, protocols. Letitia drew 2 circles that overlapped and wrote 3 words where they met. Shared, not stripped. They took a vote the way people do when the choice belongs to them. The elders chose to release the non-sacred portions publicly under a license that credited their communities by name and required anyone using the materials to come back with proof of benefit given. The law student, beaming, drafted the reciprocity clause on a single page that felt sturdier than most books. A close-up of the clause signed by elders, Letitia, and the university, with the caption, "Use equals return." The paper, 12 authors, elders first, received final acceptance with minor edits. The email arrived while they ate stew from enamel bowls. Laughter tumbled like pebbles in a stream. The audit closed with a report dull enough to be beautiful. Procedures proper, claims verified, interference documented, restitution advised. Dull is how truth likes to travel when it intends to stay. The exhibit reopened with an added wall titled "What We Keep Private and Why." Visitors read it and nodded, some with relief at rules clear enough to respect, some with surprise that not everything that can be filmed should be. A new case displayed Samuel's ledger with a facsimile. The original upstairs in climate-controlled quiet. Next to it, a small mirror with etched words. Generosity is not extraction. The last loose thread, the old mentor's diary page, unraveled publicly. The university issued a statement naming the suppression and the cost. The faculty senate voted to rename a lecture series after community teachers who had never been on a poster. It felt less like punishment and more like rearranging furniture so a house becomes safe. Roberto recorded one final message. Not a performance, a memo. He listed the scholarships he'd fund for 10 years, the royalties already transferred, the classes he'd teach only if asked, the events he'd decline if a community wasn't on the stage with him. He ended with the only line that mattered. If my name helps, use it. If it gets in the way, remove it. He sent it to the center's email and closed his laptop without checking views. Night settled on part 3 the way closure should, softly, with work left to do tomorrow. In the center, children learned to write the shelter marker on paper that crinkled under their careful hands. A teen club met in the mining town and chose a logo, a question flame that looked like a candle someone had shielded with their palm so it wouldn't go out. A grandmother taught a recipe with a rhythm, proof that syntax is sometimes cooked and eaten. Letitia stood in front of the first stone and read its last line again with the new symbol in place. Where the disappearing path meets the place to hide, the free leave names for the children who will come. She added quietly, for those children and for the girl she had been, ask with light. Leave less darkness. Say the names that carried you here. She turned to the camera one last time. Don't judge by appearances. Verify before you vilify. Integrity is a method. If this trilogy did anything for you, let it be this. Turn views into visits, comments into commitments, and algorithms into libraries. The screen held on her face and her mother's hand slipping into frame to squeeze hers. The cut came late, unhurried. The story ended where it began, with a teenager who refused to be made small and a community that refused to be made silent.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.